Okay, it's 5 o'clock, so welcome everyone to the Problem Structuring Methods Special Interest Group. So I'll hand over to Christina to to do the intros. Do you want to go ahead, Christina?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Martin. So thank you all for coming today to this really interesting special interest group meeting. It's taken quite some time to set up. We're here now. We're very honoured today to be joined by Francis O'Brien. We have a lovely little video personally done by Robert Dyson for us. And we also have Vanessa Schramm joining us from Brazil. She's joining us from a long way away. So fair play. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, I realise that there's a big time difference between there and there. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the past of soft OR and to some extent PSMs, because that's what is the forerunner of PSMs. And then we're going to look at the last 10 years of PSMs in use and how they've been used and where they've been used, which is what Vanessa is going to talk about. So I'm now going to hand over to Francis to talk about soft OR and the founders.
Hello, everyone. First of all, if I can find the video, I'm going to start with a short video that Robert has put together, which, if you like, motivates the topic and explains how firstly he got interested in the topic and then dragged me in to do some work with him, as well as a student. There was a student project in the early days. So I'm not that brilliant at this technology, but I'm hopefully going to share his video with you now. Can you all see that?
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be with you, at least virtually. This talk and the associated articles had a rather long gestation period. I was at an Informs conference some 10 years ago at either Charlotte or Austin when Graham Rand alerted me to the fact that a book was being launched which included profiles of 43 founders of operations research. The editors had tried to get 50 people, but only 43 got to press. These 43 founders were mainly Americans, but there were some Brits amongst them. They were all men, which of course is a rather different picture to the OR community these days. And some of these profiles were written by UK authors, including Graham, David Lane, Jonathan Rosenhead, and Maurice Kirby, and John Tomlin, I think. However, I purchased the book and the conference and read it from cover to cover, which is unusual for me with an academic book. At the time I was aware, well, I've been aware for some time, that soft OR is not recognised much in the US, even though it is well established in the UK. And John Mingers wrote an interesting article on this, and in particular he highlighted the fact that the US journals Management Science and Operations Research had not published any soft OR articles, and he considered this to be a matter of some concern for the soft OR community. Anyway, in reading the book, I was surprised. I just was hit by how many connections there seemed to be between these 43 founders, nearly all of them, and some aspects of soft OR. And it wasn't just the usual suspects of Ackoff and Churchman who sort of perhaps triggered the soft OR movement, but many of the people who we see as hard people seem to have a lot of soft connections. So I was having a chat with Francis over coffee one day, the kind of informal chat that doesn't happen these days, which is a pity. And we talked about this and thought, well, perhaps these connections are worth researching properly. So we set out to systematically research them. And Francis will tell you the fuller story, and the full story, of course, appears in the article. Thank you.
Right, okay, hopefully you heard that. And now what I'll do is share our presentation. Hopefully this is the right file. Can you all see that?
Yes, I can see that, Francis.
Brilliant, okay. There we go. So, yes, so this research was, as Robert says, was started out by himself. Then he dragged me in, and we got a student, Devon Shah, who was on our MSc program here at Warwick. He did some initial research for this as part of his summer dissertation. So I'm going to pick up the story from where Robert left off, and we'll start off showing you who the founders are, because I doubt that most of you have seen the book and therefore don't really know when we say founders who we are talking about. And then I'm going to, our research sort of took two angles. First of all, it was to look at the influence of the founders on those we consider to be the soft OR pioneers. And then I'm going to look at the second part, which is, if you like, the main part of our research, which is to identify a number of soft OR characteristics and say, could we find any evidence of those in the write-up of the founders and in their own work? And one of the things that really struck us was about the founders and practice, their links with practice. So we'll go there next, and then we'll end with some concluding thoughts. Now, on my screen, I can't see anything other than my slides. So if you can't hear or anything disappears, Christina, I'm going to rely on you to shout at me, because I can only see a little light. And
I promise I will. I promise I will.
Many thanks. Many thanks. So the founders, who are they? Well, here you have a list in alphabetical order. And I hope that the screen that you're viewing this on means that you can actually read some of these names. So some of these names are, really well known. Ackoff, first one up there. And if you cast your name down, people like Blackett, certainly for UK, OR, these names will be well known to some of you. But then for some of the other names, they may not be so well known. So for example, I hadn't heard of Miser or McGee or Kosmetsky before I started doing this research with Robert. So as he said in his introduction, this list was pulled together by the editors of the book, and they decided that these 43 were going to be classed as the founders of OR. He mentioned that they'd hoped to get 50. I don't know who the 7 were that never made it into the book, but these were the 43 founders that we analysed. Most of these are actually people you would associate with hard OR, but through the research we've conducted, we would argue that they weren't completely hard, that they embraced and exhibited, I think is the verbs we'd like to use. They embraced and exhibited some soft OR traits or tendencies. Not only that, but they were also concerned with the direction that OR was taking. So for example, John Little, who is associated with Little's law in queuing theory, there's a quote there saying the big problem with management science models is that managers practically never use them. And who else? Vazogny, who's also on that list, says the founders of OR were too far removed from the day-to-day problems of American business, in one of his quotes. So they have this. They exhibit these traits, is what we feel, and they're also concerned with the direction that the discipline was taking. So one of the things that we did was to look at the people that we associate with soft OR. And I've listed on this slide here the classic top 3 that when you mention PSMs and soft OR to many people, they straight away jump for the work of Eden Ackerman, Friend and Hickling, and Peter Checkland. But I've also included some of the others that appear in Jonathan Rosenhead and later John Minger's joint book on rational analysis, some of the collections there. So we have here, if you like, a classic collection of problem structuring methods. And one of the things that we did was to explore whether any of these guys were linked with the work of the founders. So in the next slides, I'm just illustrating for you some of the links that they had with the founders and others who influenced them. So we start with Eden Ackerman and the cognitive mapping soda, now journey making. And what you can see here is a number of influences of that work. So Eden and Ackerman's work cites a number of these founders. Now, as you cast your eye down, there's some expected suspects, I guess you'd call them, people like Ackoff, Beer, Forrester, Simon, etc. Not all of them actually made it onto the list of founders. So Mason and Mitroff, whose early work on challenging assumptions influenced Colin Eden, but they weren't actually on the list of founders. Maybe they should have been. Certainly their work is quite classic. Moving on to Friend and Hickling, again, you can see a number of influences: Ackoff, Beer, Stafford Beer, Howard, again Mason and Mitroff, and Rafer on decision analysis. When you get to Peter Checkland, although his work was developed outside of the OR community, we've adopted it really as a leading soft OR method. And in his early work from the 1970s, he cites Ackoff, Beer, and Churchman as key influencers. And when we look at some of the other soft OR approaches, again, you can see I've put them in bold, those that are on the list of founders, and those that aren't in bold were influencers who weren't being classed as founders. So again, you can see that there are a number of different influences to the work of these soft OR pioneers, and some of them you'd expect to see, like Ackoff in there. Others maybe not so. So von Neumann, for example, on game theory, although when you know a bit about drama theory, it does make sense. So the point of this slide—
You're breaking up a little bit.
Is that any better? How's that?
It may. Yeah, I'm hearing you. Don't know whether anybody else is having any. Could be mine. I'm not sure. It's so difficult to tell, isn't it?
I can't see. I can't even see.
There now.
Okay. I'll
Somebody
hold
said
the
all
mic.
sounds okay, so it's all okay. It's obviously my connection. There you go. You're all.
Thanks, Christina. So I guess the point of this research is to say that there are a number of the pioneers that influenced the soft OR pioneers who came a bit later, and the founders that provided that influence are at the less mathematical end of the spectrum. So you would expect to see these influences. So that didn't surprise us. But as Robert said, as he was reading the book from cover to cover every night as he did, when he was reading about some of the other founders, he began to suspect that there were some connections there and that there were some traits amongst these founders with some of the characteristics of soft OR. So he'd read the book and we had a student project, and then we felt that perhaps we needed to be a bit more systematic about this. So the first thing that we did was we went into the soft OR literature. Remember, this is some time ago, and there has been a lot more literature more recently about what constitutes soft OR or problem structuring methods. So we looked in the literature at the time to see what were the characteristics of soft OR. And at Warwick, we love this framework of context, process, and content for organising things. So we naturally used used that Andrew Pettigrew's framework just to help us organise the characteristics that we had identified from the soft OR literature. So first of all, you have characteristics of context, talking about the nature of the situation and the involvement of multiple actors or stakeholders bringing their different perspectives. Also, there being a high degree of uncertainty about the nature of the problem situation. Process characteristics are to do with engagement and interactions between stakeholders, and also concern for process issues or procedural rationality. And then content characteristics are to do with the nature of the work, the nature of the models that are being used for focus of discussion, whether they're transparent, understandable, and typically these being diagrammatic models, as it says here, such as causal maps, cognitive maps, inference diagrams, etc. So we identified a number of these characteristics, and then we systematically went through each of the founders, starting with the biographies that were written in the book, and then occasionally dipping out into the published works of the founders themselves. And we went through each of these to identify whether the founder exhibited any of these characteristics. And we found that they fell into three groups. And if you read the paper, we go into a bit more detail about these groupings. And there were those founders that exhibited a lot of these characteristics, founders that exhibited some, and founders that exhibited very few. So I'm just going to illustrate now for you some of the harder founders, or the more mathematical or quantitative founders that exhibited some of the traits. Now, I'm only just pulling up a few examples here to illustrate the point. There are many more examples that we go into detail with in the paper for each of these. So I have here 4 names for you. You may not know who these guys are, so I've made some notes. So Bellman was into dynamic programming, and we read that he was concerned with applications where qualitative features were important. Gass is someone into linear programming, optimization, the analytic hierarchy process. And we found that his work is recognizing the involvement of multiple stakeholders with multiple objectives. Gomery is an integer programming person who looked at the very challenging problem of international trade. And Little, as I said before, who was concerned with queuing theory, he was concerned about issues, as it says here, where there were multiple stakeholders with different perspectives, and his biography talks about ill-defined problem situations. When we look at the founders and process characteristics, Gass, Gomery, and Little I've already introduced to you. Arnoff was a guy who wrote the first textbook on OR with Churchman and Ackoff. And he wrote an interesting article in Planning Review in 1976 called Managers Should Marry Models. And what you can see here on this slide is again, a few examples of how the founders were concerned with process characteristics. So just as a reminder, what we meant by process characteristics, that was to do with whether or not they were concerned with the process of OR, whether they were concerned with issues of procedural rationality, and whether they were concerned with and engaged with multiple stakeholders. And as you can see here, as I said, these are just some examples of how these founders illustrated these traits, these characteristics related to process. A lot of involvement of multiple stakeholders, even though these are quite hard OR people. And then finally, the third grouping was related to content. You know, what were the nature of the models that these guys were building? So Bloomstein was very much into exploring the criminal justice system and criminology. Kosmetsky was a DEA person looking into financial situations, and Vazonyi was an optimizer. So again, hard OR people, but we see evidence of them using diagrammatic models, typically to communicate with multiple stakeholders. So, for example, the George diagram was often used up front to explain some of the technical concepts of the situation that they were looking at, and the book talks about them being called George diagrams. We get an example. I think I've got that in the next slide. Yeah, I think this is the goes into diagram of Visogni, and the book tells us that that they're using these diagrams first of all to capture and represent the complexity of the complex issues that they're dealing with, as a facilitative device to communicate with different stakeholders and other parties. And there's just some quotes there taken from the book. And here's another one. This is from Bonda, who differentiates between two worlds. And this resonates with the work of Peter Checkland in with his soft systems methodology, when he talks about his two different types of worlds. So they were using diagrammatic models in their work. When I got involved in the research, one of the things that really struck me, because I assumed that all these guys were academics, but actually the opposite was true. They were all rooted in practice, these hard modelers. If you think about the time that these guys were at the peak of their careers, we're coming out of World War II. So a lot of them had their roots as early OR professionals in practice. Danzig was in the Pentagon. Gass was involved in the Air Force. You can see here a lot of examples of them being involved in analysis related to the times that they were practicing. And then even after the war, you can see that they're still really motivated to engage with real interventions and real problems, not just associated with the war. So we've got Little looking at cookies and Gass looking at police operations. And we're seeing examples of that they believe in the importance of engaging with their clients, you know, very much talking to clients throughout that modeling process. And this is just another example, a bit more detail for you about how they've engaged with practice. So Ballas, as it says here, looked into the traveling salesman problem. This is where we need Robert, because Robert remembers a lot of these guys. When Robert did his PhD in cutting planes and all of that to do with floating glass at Pilkington's, I think it was. That's where he did his PhD. So some of these guys were, you know, really much more vivid in his memory than me. They're names to me, and I can therefore just present you with the details on the slide. But you can see that each of these examples here shows how these guys are engaged in real novel problems of the time. Remember, I guess the time that these guys got involved in these problems, they weren't well defined. One of the things that we see now with OR practitioners, you know, you can talk about going into a situation and you recognize that it is something that has been well defined. The thing that struck me about when you look at the time that these guys were practicing in the 50s, in the 60s, in some cases back in the 40s, these problems weren't well defined. They were very ill defined until these guys came along and defined them. So in summary, where have we been? Well, we've looked at the soft OR pioneers and demonstrated how they were influenced by a subset of the founders and the founders that you would perhaps normally associate with soft OR. But our research has shown that a wider group of founders, often who you would characterize as hard modelers, do align with a lot of the soft OR characteristics in those three groupings of context, process, and content. They were all heavily engaged with practice, both the proponents of soft OR and the founders. That was something that really did struck me. And I think that that is something that is a contrast to today's academia. A lot of our academics are not so heavily engaged with practice. They didn't all come from practice to the extent that the founders did. Something that we explore more in the paper that I haven't just touched on here that is interesting is our view that there's strong evidence from both the founders and from when you look at definitions of OR that soft OR is a legitimate subset of OR, and this links back to the comment that Robert made in the video that links with the work that John Mingus did and the letters that John Mingus wrote himself and organised on behalf of a number of us who were signatories to that, you know, protesting, if you like, that soft OR wasn't recognised. And if you are interested in the work, we managed to get it into operations research. I think the story of how we got it into operations research is exciting as well. Robert and I sat down one day and had a conversation. Where do we send it? Robert was an editor of eJaw. He wasn't too comfortable in sending it there. We knew that, I think it was David Lane had published a paper in the forum in operations research. So we just said, well, let's have a look at that. And then let's just try it. You know, if we're going to get a reject, it will get rejected quickly. And that's, I think, a real lesson for any younger people that are switching in today is go for it, try it, you never know. So as you can see, I'm smiling because I think I remember the conversations that we had, and I was smiling at the time saying to him, wouldn't this be fun if we got it into operations research? And lo and behold, we did. So what about going forward? I think there are lessons here for the whole OR community, particularly for hard OR. I think that there is a lot that they can learn from the soft OR approach to formulation. And this is where my research interests are taking me now. What are the soft skills that OR professionals need and analytics professionals need, and what can they learn from the soft OR community? What I'm finding is that when you talk about soft skills, particularly if you read what's written, a lot of them are talking about interpersonal skills. I think there are technical soft OR skills that are technical soft skills to do related to soft modeling that hard OR people could embrace. What about the soft OR community? Well, perhaps they should be less concerned with the purity of their problem structuring methods and more concerned with generic problem structuring, because then there might be clearer links or easier links with the hard OR community. And mixed modeling, maybe this is a way forward. Maybe it offers a platform for both hard and soft communities to engage with each other. And just to finish with some references that have gone into the putting together of the presentation. So there's the work from John Mingus and the reference to the letter that he organised in ORMS Today back in 2009. So I will stop sharing at that point, say thank you very much and hand back to Christina.
Thank you so much, Francis. My head was just teeming with questions during that, but I'm going to keep quiet. It's like, oh, that's a bit like, oh, that's a bit like. Anyway, and you spoke to me about the practice thing. Funnily enough, I came into OR as a mathematician. I worked in practice, and guess where I ended up? And then met Colin Eden, and he said that's exactly what happened to him. I thought, well, I'm good company. So next we have Vanessa Schramm, who's going to talk to us about the last 10 years of problem structuring methods, how they're being used, where they're being used, who's using them. And I think this is really, really interesting. And I would say that this was a great tip from Francis and from Robert, who said you really should get this person involved because it would be a really interesting session. So thank you to you two for the suggestion. And I'll hand over to you, Vanessa.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can see those. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanessa Schramm. I am from Brazil, so my English is not so good. I try to do my best. Firstly, thank you, Christina, for the invitation. The work I will present was developed in collaboration with my mentor student, Alexandre Gomes Jr. This work is part of his master degree studies, and it has been published at Systemic Practice and Action Research Journal in March 2021. So the goal of the study was to perform a
Vanessa,
yes.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but you're getting a little bit of fuzzing over your microphone. So we're finding it difficult to hear you.
It's better now?
Yes, that's better.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Can I repeat, or it's okay to start from this
I
point?
think it's okay to start from this slide, yeah.
Okay, so the goal of the study was to perform a literature review on PSMs over the last decade. The specific goals are to verify the distribution of papers according to year, journals, countries, and authors, to identify the most frequently applied problem structuring methods, and to identify the main application areas, and to present methodological, theoretical advances and emerging topics. The keywords used were problem structuring methods, or soft system methodology, or strategic choice approach, or strategic option development and analysis. Note that we use as keywords the most important PSM methods, and we searched in the following fields of the paper: title, abstract, and authors provided, keywords provided by the author, and keyword plus. We used the Web of Science to make our search, and we consider the following indexes: Science Citation Index Expanded, Social Science Citation Index, and Emerging Source Citation Index. So we search for article or review papers published in English between 2010 and to February 2020. So this is the summary of our search. The search had returned 247 documents, but we removed 15 papers because they did not meet criteria document type or language. For example, some papers that were published in conference were removed. Then 332 papers were submitted to a preliminary analysis according to criteria pointed out by Flick 2019. And after that, we removed 10 papers. Then the analysis proceeded with 322 papers. The analysis was organized into 3 parts: publication year, descriptive analysis, distribution of papers according to publication year, journals, countries, authors, and research methodologies used. Bibliometric analysis, we constructed a keyword occurrence network, co-citation of authors, and citations network. And we performed a qualitative analysis. The papers were analyzed in terms of application areas, applied problem structuring methods, methodologicals, and theoretical developments. This graph shows the distribution of 317 papers that were published from 2010 and 2019. We removed five papers that were published in 2021. Oh, sorry, 2020. In the first 5 years, around 20 papers were published per year. The graph shows an uptrend in number of publications from 2015 onwards, with around 32% having been published in in 2018 and 2019. However, in 2017, the number of publications decreased significantly. In this year, the European Journal of Operational Research, which is the journal with highest number of publications related to problem-tutoring methods, during this year, in 2017, this journal published only one paper on this topic. In 2018, the same journal published 16 papers related to problem-tutoring methods, provoking an increase of 86% in the number of papers in relation to the previous year. The papers were published in 128 different journals, but 5 journals were responsible for around 50% of the publications, which are European Journal of Operational Research, Journal of Operational Research Society, Systemic Practice and Action Research, Systemic Research and Behavioral Science, and Group Decision and Negotiation. So we have around 5 journals that encompass around 50% of publications that were reviewed. Regarding the origin of the papers, they were produced by authors from 61 countries, but the leaders are England with 117 papers, Australia, 41, United States, Italy, New Zealand, and Brazil with 19 publications. The software used in this case verifies all authors of each paper and counts the number of publications of each. The total number of authors is 797, but 10 authors are responsible for around 23% of publication, which means 75 papers. These authors are listed in this table. Regarding the research methodologies applied in these papers, 212 papers are case studies. 49 papers aim to develop theoretical assumptions about problem-tutoring methods. 25 papers propose new approach to structure complex problems, but without presenting an application of this approach. 18 papers are surveys that seek to investigate characteristics of problem-tutoring methods interventions, and 18 papers are literature review papers. We use the CITNet Explorer software to construct a citation network. And also this software calculates a citation score of each publication, and we find that the 10 most relevant papers are the software or outcomes of age, but not everywhere, by Mingers. Facilitate modeling in operational research by Franco and Montbiller, the paper of Ackerman, and in this list, okay? So the most relevant paper, according to our review, was the paper from Mingers. The 212 case studies were classified into 5 categories. Business management, we have 67 papers, around 37%. Environment management, 36 papers. Healthcare sector, social issues, and other areas, in which we have 47 papers. In business management, papers were grouped into 10 topics: supply chain management, knowledge management, innovation management, organization strategy, information security, cost management, stakeholder management, support decision-making in the context of business management, change management, and other issues related to business management. Around 66% using soft system methodology, the SSM, individually or integrated with other methods. It's important to emphasize that SSM is one of the keywords used in the search. Environment management, the papers in this category was organized into 8 topics: marine ecosystem management, water resource management, environmental conflicts, climate change, floods, forest management, waste management, and other environment management. As in business management, SSM is the most applied PSM with around 40% of the cases. But another PSM that is often used in the environment management context is the driver pressures state impact and response model of intervention, which is in some papers related with problem study method is not referred as a PSM. In healthcare sector, papers were grouped into 3 topics: improve the service of healthcare, public policies of health, and other issues related to management of healthcare. Around 90% of the papers used SSM methodology, soft system methodology, individually or integrated with other methods. In social issue, we have improved the service, public policies of health. Sorry, I think that this table is wrong. Okay, sorry. And other areas, we have public management, military management, non-profit organization, teaching and research, systems design, science and technology conflict, Buddhist organization, elder care, rocket launch, mass media, 5G technology, tourism, crisis management, service dominant logic. SSM is the most applied, is the most frequently applied PSM also. Regarding the methodology and theoretical advances, we divided into 5 topics: development of new approaches, and the main finds were recent advances were made in the development of new approaches for dealing with complex problems. Methodological issues of problem study methods are also addressed in some literature review papers. Aspects of intervention. Some studies have examined facilitated modeling approaches in practice. Others explore the role of facilitators. Multi-methodologies is a relevant topic. Benefits and drawbacks of this type of methodology, of using multi-methodologies. Combination of the multi-criteria decision-making aiding with problem study methods. And community operational research is a fruitful application area for problem study methods. Is an important finding that we discovered in this study. And we noted that efforts are still being applied to increase the recognition and acceptance of problem study method in the operational research community. The number of publications on we verified that the number of publications in problem structuring method has been increased over the years, particularly in Brazil. We have a large number of journals in which these papers are being published. This journal encompasses issues on different knowledge areas. Most of publications come from studies that were developed in Europe, particularly in England. United States is responsible for only 37 papers, around 10% of the publication. From the list of the 10 authors with the highest number of publications, 7 of them are affiliated to European universities and 6 of them from universities in United Kingdom. So United Kingdom is a region in which where PSM has a huge relevance. Most of the papers were published in the European Journal of Operational Research. Regarding applications, most of reviewed papers present application of problem structuring methods for addressing business management problem. Software system methodology is the most frequently applied, PSM. Again, we use this method as one of the keywords used in the search, but we also used SODA and SCA. The high popularity of soft system methodology among the problem structuring method might induce the mistake of thinking that problem structuring method and SSM are the same things. And here I put that PSM's club includes only 3 methods. When we read a paper, it's very common when we read a paper, we find that the most important PSMs are SSM, SODA, and SCA. Meanwhile, various other methods and techniques are being developed and successfully applied for structuring complex problems. An example is the DPSER that appears as one of the this method is very applied, is very often applied in the context of environment management. And regarding the question, what is a problem structuring method? We need to update the answer to include other methods as problem structuring methods, and also to avoid misinterpretation about what a PSM is and what case this type of analysis is recommended. Regarding emerging topics, combination of problem structuring method with other techniques and method is an emerging topic. An example is the use of PSM with multi-criteria methods. The motivation that gave rise to problem structuring method more than 15 years ago remains the same. That is, the focus must be on the problem and not the method or technique. So you need to evaluate the problem to then define what method is appropriate to each case. Studies involve the development and application of problem structuring method have a close connection to behavioral operational research. And as conclusion, we have problem structuring method have gained popularity worldwide, but studies are still mainly concentrated in the community of operational research in Europe, particularly in United Kingdom. We encourage operational research communities to review the definition of problem structuring methods, aiming to make it wider in order to include other existing methods and techniques for structuring complex problems. Multi-methodology approach for dealing with complex unstructured unstructured problems is a trendy topic, and the consolidation of behavioral operational research area may have positive impacts on problem study method, since both areas are closely connected. This is all. Thank you. For more details, you can see the paper I can share with you. And thank you for your attention. And again, sorry for my English.
No. Vanessa, I was going to say, more than anything else, thank you so much for doing this for us. When I can see that, you know, English is definitely not your first language, but you've done such a great job there. And I bet it's a lot better than any of us would do if we tried to do it in Portuguese, especially Brazilian Portuguese. Yeah, Brazil, we would have no hope. So
thank you, Christine, again.
Much. Thank you. I thought that was an amazing coverage of how much PSMs are being used and so many papers. Yeah, it's actually really heartening to see it being used so much. And you made some really important points there, but I don't want to talk too much. I want to throw this open to the floor so we've actually got some time for discussion. There's been a discussion going on, but I think what would be really nice is if we actually get some questions in. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, good plan.
So who would like to stick their hand up?
I think a good
oh, we've got
maybe a good place to start is.
Sorry, Martin, I'll leave it to you.
No, sorry, no, it's fine. Alberto, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for both very good presentations and stimulating presentations. I have a question for both presenters, actually. And the question has to do with the fact that my question to the audience as well is, should we really be concerned about trying to define what PSMs are, or is it all about problem structuring per se as an area of activity where certain skills are required? Francis's paper reminded me of the following. Of course, many OR people, hard OR people, soft OR, mixed methods OR people, they all have a craft to make sense of a problem situation. I think the problem is that that craft, we don't know much about it because it doesn't get published, at least in the US. In Europe, there is more interest in knowing that craft. But my question is, even though there have been a couple of papers in EJOS about trying to define what PSMs are, but is it about revealing the craft of problem structuring rather than whether we're using one method or the other? I mean, I was looking at the chat, and yes, I mean, many consultants use lots of things to structure problems, and I'm sure we can learn a lot from that. It's just an open question. Sorry if I'm a bit messy about articulating what I wanted to say. But it's about the method is about problem structuring as an activity.
So Francis, do you want to respond to that?
I think that's an interesting point, Alberto. Yeah, I definitely think there is. If we look at today, you know, problems today that consultants are dealing with, I definitely think there is scope for problem structuring activity. I just wish some of these guys were, I know some of them are still alive, some of the founders, because I'd love to know what they did, you know, back in the day, and how when they approach some of these scheduling problems that we see loads of mathematical stuff on in the journals, you know, when these things weren't well structured, how they went about structuring them. So yeah, I think there is definitely a lot there to be said about focusing on the problem structuring activity rather than, you know, the other things that you talked about. My brain is still whirring. I'm not sure I can put together a coherent answer, you know, in this. I almost need to sort of bat it back and forth with you so that I can get my thinking.
It is your answer is more coherent than my question, so apologies for that.
Kathy's got her hand up. I think she might have an answer for us.
I don't. I was just going to say that just my experience, but having been somebody that was using SSM, not always all of it, but using it. In the last year or so, I would just say that I've been doing facilitated problem structuring without using a particular named method, just what was needed to help a group have a conversation. And I would still like this to be considered problem structuring, you know, and just because I haven't thought of a template that somebody else can use, because it might take a little bit of time. And I think that's where I think Vanessa, I don't know if it was Vanessa or Francis, one of the two of you said they've got the problem structuring community have to stop being so purist. It might have been Francis actually. So I was listening. But this is the truth, that it might be the case that if that is removed, and we're sort of, you know, and I think it is the people reviewing papers, and there's got to be, you know, criteria that all problem structuring methods fit. And I think in Rosenhead's book, there are certain criteria that, you know, fit with PSMs. If you fit that part, then, you know, and you've got a typical problem, then why can't it be called a PSM? So that would be my argument. And given that, you know, we've had a radical change of practice in the last year with the pandemic, where it's a lot more about conversation, and that has to be reflected. So that's what I have to say.
That's a great contribution. I'm going to bring Mike in a moment, but I have to say one thing that really triggers me with all of this is something that I said when I very first came into this field, which was, why don't we hear about all of those people who do hard OR problems in a real world situation? How did they scope the problem? We never hear about that bit. And actually it's really, really important. So I'm not sure how we can encourage them, but we really need to encourage them to write a paper about that bit as well, and not just the hard bit, but please give us the rest of it as well. And now I'm going to pass over to Mike, who I'm sure has got lots to say on this subject.
Well, I'll try not to say lots. But Alberto, yes, thanks for kicking us off with that question. And I love going back to Czechland every time, and, you know, buried in the nether regions beyond page 200 of Systems Thinking, Systems Practice is Czechland's thoughts about exactly that question. And he defines for soft systems methodology constitutive rules. And he says, what is soft systems methodology if it isn't for these constitutive rules? And those rules are quite declarative, but very specifically, he talks about them being generative. And so, if you like, they are generative of the types of behavior that you might see amongst practitioners that are using soft systems methodology. So, if you like, it's the generative property of the constitutive rules that basically accounts for the breadth of practice that you actually see, and could be labeled soft systems methodology, but it's very broad. So yeah, with Leroy, we tried to capture that and extend that idea by coming up with generic constitutive rules. And I think that does try to basically say, you know, what are the properties of the performative behaviors in practice that people are doing when they're structuring a problem? And that was what we were trying to get to. But, you know, I've had run-ins with the dean of my business school on this question, because when I sit down and talk to him about my work and about problem structuring and spend some time elaborating, at the end of it, he just says, isn't that obvious? Isn't that what everybody does? Doesn't everybody who's a professional who's dealing with a messy problem structure it in some way? And I say, yeah, I agree with you, they do, but it doesn't delegitimize it as an area of something that can be studied as practice and something that can be codified in order to actually get a better understanding about how it works and how to do it better. So, so it's a fascinating question. I think there's a lot more to be done with it, but I also think that is something for us in the OR field to reach out into other disciplines and actually say, well, we've got a lot of experience of codified knowledge in this space, and we can bring that into other disciplines as well, not least management, because it desperately needs it. So that's my 2p worth on that.
All right. Thanks, Mike. That's really good. I think you're, yeah, absolutely. The really important point, I think, there. Can I just nip over to Alberto just a moment? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just to comment. Thank you, Mike, for that answer. And I think you raised an important point. The paper that you wrote with Leroy, it was closer to my initial proposal about should we focusing on problem structure in general. I think the paper that Francis mentioned in the chat by Chris Smith and Duncan Shaw is a little bit more restrictive. So they do have a framework which says this is a PSM and this is not if you have these 10 characteristics. So that would be the other side. Both papers are excellent in my view. They are trying to make a contribution, but I think it is still a debate. And yes, your comment about the need to codify what we're doing is important because also it has implications for training and education, you know. Yeah. Absolutely. That's all. I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Thanks, Alberto. I think Ying, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sir. I just want to share some of my experience just a little bit. You know, being in America and doing PSM kind of research, it's quite hard. And Francis already, you know, talked about that. I read Minger's paper and everything. So thank you for this, you know, great opportunity for me to see all of your faces. You know, people who believe in the same kind of similar way of looking at problem solving, but not to the product itself, but the process and everything. So I just want to express my excitement to you guys. I just newly came into the field, and I cited all of your papers, and thank you for this good session. Thank you. That's it.
Whereabouts are you, Ying? You mentioned you're in the
Sorry?
USA, but
I'm in Virginia.
In the USA are you? Huh?
I'm in Virginia, Old Dominion University. I just graduated recently last year. You know, looking at the investigation on what and how soda affect confidence in you know, a group of students who are trying to solve the problem. You know, so it was very excited. But then when I got out of the school and look at everything, and it's real that in America, when we talked about operational research, they think about optimization, only optimization, you know, numbers, algorithms, you know, what is soft OR? And I even had a very interesting conversation when I first started with this topic with one of my committees, and he was in the harder OR people. They said that if you don't do it well in hard OR, it doesn't mean that you need soft OR. So I think Christina said that, you know, it was interesting that there's no information before they go to that assumptions that, you know, we're going to have this assumption to try to solve this problem. How did you get into that assumption? I think that's the missing part of literature. By all means, I'm not a, you know, I don't have much knowledge about that, but I totally agree with Christina. It was a, you know, it was a trigger to me as well, that to try to prove him wrong, that, hey, that's something that, you know, you have to. And I like what Francis said earlier, and I have my notes here. She said technical soft skills that might be needed into a specific process before we even jump into those assumptions. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for coming and contributing. I hope we see more of you, Ying. Someone's asked in the chat what your paper is, so if you could put that in there, we would be very grateful. Has your work with students been published, Ying? It sounds really interesting. There you go. So if you could put that in the chat, we'd love that. Thank you.
Thank
Francis,
you.
I think you did have your hand up and you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just picking up on what Mike was talking about, Peter Checkland, and I've got my little research diary here, and I dug back through and found the notes I made at his plenary at OR 60, and My notes are never brilliant, but he did talk about the holism of OR and as an opportunity of bringing hard and soft OR together. And I know the Society usually records conference plenaries, so it may well be that they'll have a recording of his plenary talk. I remember at the time thinking this really did resonate, you know, with me and the work that Robert and I were doing and the interest that we had. So yeah, just maybe somebody could have a check to see if it's still there. May well be interesting to follow up on.
Simon French was here earlier on, and he was talking about, Jim and I have had this conversation as well, Jim Scholes and I, about OR being a spectrum from soft to hard, and it's not either or. It's all part of one thing, and the problem is that people tend to take for granted that you do the soft bit, and therefore we don't necessarily talk about it enough. And that's why we've got all this missing from these early interventions, that they don't talk about that bit. So thankfully, some of them do, which you've put in your paper, which is great. So it's really good to hear that. So I'm conscious that we're actually running over time. We're at 6:05 now, and we don't seem to have any further hands up. So I think we're going to call it a day here. Thank you so much for a really stimulating conversation. It's been a fantastic talk. We have, hopefully we will get this up fairly soon, and it will be on the YouTube channel, I think, and it will be linked to from our page as well. So we can all rewatch it, and any important notes we want to take from it, we can take. So, oh, thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Somebody else put up that they really enjoyed this session because it's just so good to hear about the past and hear that soft OR has been there all along. It has. What we just need to do is stop people from taking it for granted and realise that the codification and the structuring is actually really important. It also gives us handles that we can then apply behavioural OR to, and we can apply theoretical developments to. And we can't actually further that if we don't start somewhere. And I think that's what we've shown is that actually people have been starting for a long time, but it never seems to get out of the starting blocks where people go, oh yeah, you just do that. But, hopefully we can make the difference there. So thank you all so much for coming today. It's been really great to see you all here. I'm going to hand over to Martin to say ta-ta.
Can I just interrupt?
Yep, thanks very much.
I think I've posted a link to the Peter Checkland video.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Mike.
I think that's the right one.
Okie dokie.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great. We just need to copy it quickly before the meeting ends. Thanks very much, Mike. Okay, thanks very much to everyone. Thanks particularly to our two wonderful presenters today. So really huge thanks to you both. Fantastic presentations, and we'll see you all in September for the next PSM SIG session. Okay, thanks then. Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.